So, Patti, great episode today. Vijay from NMI, a returning guest that gives us some really insightful information.
Really cool stuff. I mean, everything that they're doing right now in terms of opening up new market opportunities, new verticals.
Yes.
Really good stuff.
I was particularly interested in the Mastercard. You touched on it in an earlier Insiders Report, and then here we have the guy that's actually doing the integration. So I thought that was great. And then tell us about the Insiders Report.
It's another update on Interchange. As I have referred to it in the green sheet, Interchange on the hot seat. I won't tell anybody anymore. Stick around and listen to that section.
Yeah, let's just say Interchange is, Visa and Mastercard are walking on thin ice right now with a certain U.S. senator. So let's talk about that. Going into the questions from the fields. Talk about the one-call close, the holy grail. Every salesperson's like, oh, I wish I could do the one-call close. I know a lot of top producers that are doing it. Today, I talk about when should you do the one-call close and when should you not, and how to develop that one-call close process.
It's going to be a great show. Let's go, James.
Welcome to the Merchant Sales Podcast.
All right, everybody. Patti and I are here today with the CEO of NMI, Vijay Sondhi. How are you doing today, Vijay?
I'm doing great.
Awesome. Good. So we're always seeing NMI in the news, always doing exciting things. I'm a big NMI fan. We've integrated NMI into our software at our company. And so I'm a big fan. And so I'm excited today to talk about some of these acquisitions. We saw Credit Call and USA ePay are kind of the most recent ones that we've seen. Can you bring us up to speed a little bit? Talk about these acquisitions and the direction that NMI is going and how these acquisitions fit into that.
Sure. First of all, thanks for having us on the show. And we are huge fans of the Green Sheet. We read it the minute it comes out, and we love those page-turning sounds when we look at it online, because obviously it's no paper.
I love the sounds too, I have to tell you.
And it's great to be reunited with Patti as well. We did a podcast a couple of years ago. So I will talk about the two acquisitions that you mentioned. Credit Call, a company that had been based in the UK in a town called Bristol in the west part of England. And they had been experts in building card-present gateways and L2, L3 certification engines, as well as kernels, EMV kernels that go into devices. And the reason why we were so attracted to Credit Call was that NMI had the number one card not present white labeled gateway, I would say, out there. And we weren't as good on the EMV side. And we all knew that Omnichannel is the holy grail for merchants. So putting together the number one white labeled card present gateway to take 60 plus EMV devices, every Ingenico, Verifone, you can, BB Pause, you just keep naming it. And together with what NMI had, which is over 200 processor connections and a leading white labeled CNP, gave us unified commerce enablement. That's how we rebranded, and that's why we came together with that company.
Cool. Well, you mentioned something there that's been kind of in my back of my mind, wondering what it all means. And, that's the EMV piece and this idea of an EMV kernel provider. Can you explain exactly what that is and the role it plays in supporting contactless payments? Why we should even care about it?
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, EMV stands for EuroPay, Mastercard, Visa, I believe, which is an ancient acronym.
Right.
How many years old is it? Do any of you guys know?
Oh, at least 20, and it's probably more than that. But I remember it was interesting because it wasn't long after the standard came out that EuroPay was acquired by MasterCard, I believe, right? And so it's like, I've always wondered, why do they keep that E in there? But I guess, but it's at least, I would say it dates back probably to the late 90s, at least from my recollection.
Yeah, that was my guess too. So the reason why I asked the question on the date is because it's in Europe or in Canada or Australia, EMV is old news. They've had chip cards for 20 years.
Correct.
And they have been dealing with the notion of a cryptogram, just going into the basis of what is EMV. It's having a chip with a CPU and some data on it on the physical credit card. And one of the reasons why EMV was more advanced in the United States was not because Americans were slow to technology adoption. It's because Europe had better telecommunications. Sorry, the United States had better telecommunications. In Europe, right? They had nationalized telecom, and it was too expensive to do real-time authorization.
Correct.
So they had to cache some of the transaction on the card, and that's why they invented the chip. And once you start to cache data on a card, you need very good security. And then later we had fraud in the United States, or more fraud. So we needed that technology. Now, what we are experts are, and this is why it's so important to have L2 kernel expertise, is we know how to build the code according to the EMV ISO spec into a device, and to create the cryptogram and to decrypt it and to send it to MasterCard or Visa or Amex to get the keys. And I'll tell you in a second, if that makes sense, why it's so important now in 2021 going forward.
And so what you're saying then is that, just so I can make sure that we all are on the same page here, is the kernel is actually the cryptographic code that's on the device itself that communicates with the card. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's very close. The kernel is the piece of software that's physically on the point of sale credit card reader.
On the reader,
that has the ability in a secure enclave that can never be tampered.
Gotcha.
To read the card, get the cryptogram off the EMV card, and then send it in a secure way to Visa or MasterCard, who have the private keys, and decrypt it and send it back. So it's a piece of software in the firmware on the device.
Okay, cool.
Now, the reason why that's so important, because now we're entering into a new era. We are actually entering into an era where any Android phone can very easily become a payment acceptance device. And we're going to go from kernel in hardware to kernel in the cloud. And we're already doing this at NMI with MasterCard and Global Payments in the United States. Other providers are doing it in Malaysia, in Europe, in Canada. And you can do this where you don't need to have the kernel on a piece of hardware.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, that's really important. And it still has the same security protocol, even though it's in the cloud.
That is right. And so what happens now is, imagine a world where you are somebody at a farmer's market and you want to take payments. And right now it's COVID. No one wants to touch anything. There's no cash. Everyone has an Apple Pay or a contactless card in their wallet.
Right.
Now, you have to sign up for Square. Now you're stuck with Square. Square is a great solution, but maybe you want to process with another provider where you have better pricing for where you live. And you don't want to get that little plastic dongle and pair it to Bluetooth. Guess what? Go to the App Store, download an app, and you will instantly turn an Android phone. The NFC antenna will become the payment acceptance device, and you're taking payments.
That actually brings me to something, because I reported on this on a podcast maybe about a month or two ago about how NMI is working with MasterCard on this tap to phone solution. I think that's what you're referring to here, right? Can you give it? I'd love it if you could give our listeners a little bit of a briefing on what that means for extending your reach, as you said, to farmers markets. But that's not the only place. Maybe if you could just give us an idea of how tap to phone works and what you're doing with MasterCard and Global.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's fascinating about the tap to phone technology that we did a proof of concept together with MasterCard. We did a press release on it in January, and Global Payments was the processor, is that we have the ability at NMI, because we are a payment gateway and we connect to over 200 different processors, to let you pick your processor and not be beholden to whichever processor, the bundled solution, be it PayPal, Square, or iZettle in Europe. So suddenly we're giving you choice and we're giving you flexibility. And so I think what's really interesting in disruptive technology waves, do you guys remember when you had your first camera phone? Patti, James, when was the first time you had a camera phone?
Oh, yeah, I remember.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. It was probably 2008. I was a little bit later than most people I knew. So it was probably 2008, 2009.
About same for me.
Yeah, because before that, I was a big camera person. So I always had my 35 millimeter with me. And then one day somebody's like, you don't need to carry that thing all the time.
Well, and so my point is, those cameras were really rudimentary, and they were really for very basic photos, and they didn't threaten the SLR market. Well, in payments, we're probably going to see something similar. Right now, The use case is for the micro merchant, the massage therapist, the lawnmower, the garage door installer,
Right.
who doesn't want the little dongle. But over time, my prediction is that we will start to see that technology, just like the new iPhone 12. My wife just got one. The pictures are incredible. I mean, she would never buy an SLR, and she was a professional photographer. That was her living.
Right.
And she wouldn't use an SLR. So I think a tip of the iceberg is we did a little proof of concept, and we say farmer's market, but we can envisage a world where you might have that same technology. Maybe it's an Android phone in a chip that is embedded into the checkout counter at your big box retailer.
Okay.
And you won't need an EMV kernel because the kernel will be in the cloud. And again, you will be able to choose your processor. And people like NMI are selling that middleware tech stack to enable it. Today, it's at the long tail. I predict it will start to become much more prevalent in the main markets.
And particularly for micro merchants, but that would only be the starting point, is what you're saying, right? I mean, I could envision, I've been to markets where, boutique restaurants or grocers will send somebody to the market, right, on a Saturday. Well, they already have their own processor at their home base. So this would enable them to send their people out to the farmer's market or the food market or whatever, the open air market, and basically use as an extension of the physical POS.
Absolutely. And imagine you can do that with maybe gig economy workers who you don't want to give them a $50 or $100 or $200 POS reader. They don't even work for you. They may not work for you next week.
Right.
And so, today it only works on Android. That's why I keep mentioning that, because Apple does lock down the wallet and the secure element on the phone. But you probably saw, I think you reported on the green sheet that Apple bought a company in Canada called MobiWave, that has a similar technology to NMI of kernel in the cloud. Maybe we'll see it on iPhones very soon too. But you've actually absolutely hit the nail on the head. You can start to extend payment acceptance in a ubiquitous manner. I used to work at Visa, and one of the inhibitors of growth of our network was we had way more card holders than merchant acceptance points. That's increased over the years. And with this, removing hardware from the equation, we've just lowered the barrier for anyone to become a merchant acceptor.
Well, I think another really important part of that, Vijay, is the ISVs that, as this technology expands, the opportunities for them is unbelievable, because, one of their big barriers is these ISVs are trying to get their technology to small business owners is that, well, if you want our technology, you're going to have to throw away your Clover device and you're going to have to use this. Whereas with this, it's saying you don't need any of that anymore, just your smartphones. I just talked to one the other day that's doing this with restaurants already. Now, again, they have to have the dongle and everything. So it's the inconvenience factor, but, it's just, hey, just use your servers, just use their phone, and so, yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be very interesting. Are you already seeing that where a lot of ISVs are reaching out and kind of asking about this and how to incorporate it?
Yeah, we are. I'll give an example. I can't name the partner of ours, but we have a partner that is in the field service area, and they actually provide software for scheduling and billing, as well as like Yelp reviews and what they call reputation management for field service workers. And they specialize in plumbers, electricians, garage door installers. Guess what? That industry is booming in COVID. All of us are working from home, and we're fixing our garage doors, and we're getting new plumbing put in and new electrical connections. And they have a terrible time managing hardware devices, basically remote key injections in secure cages, and delivering to that plumber who, again, may be a gig economy worker. And they are salivating at the notion that we could give them an SDK or some APIs they could call, and they could embed that into their, let's say, plumber app. Right. And they could just download it to the plumber, turn it on, turn it off when the person's working for them, and boom, they're ready to go. Now, one of the inhibitors to this technology until COVID was not every consumer had a contactless device on them. Right. And so as long as people still need to dip or swipe because the card itself is not contactless, or the consumer doesn't have Apple Pay or Android Pay, we were like, for that edge case. Right. But I'd like to ask you both, when was the last time you paid with a card versus a contactless card, let's say a dip or a tap? How would you split your purchases?
Mine are 100% contactless. So
yeah, I'm not 100%, but I'm pretty close. I actually only have one card that's contactless, that's can affect that. And so that's the card I'm using almost, whenever possible. Because of that very reason. I don't want to have to dip my card in, and I also think it's kind of cool to go, tap, I'm done, I'm out of here.
Yeah, I got this really funny experience. I was at Starbucks this morning before doing this podcast with you guys. And I have my face mask on, and I have an iPhone, and it turns out that Face ID doesn't work with the face mask.
Right.
I'm sure you guys all know that.
Right.
But I have an Apple Watch right here on my wrist, and when I double click the bottom button, my Chase card shows up, and it doesn't need the face because it's on my strap, so I'm authenticated. And so I just use this, and I do feel a little bit like, for older people on the podcast, Dick Tracy, or I feel like.
And it's funny you say that there was a guy in front of me. I was like at this little country store the other day, which I go to because I can use my contactless card. And there was a guy in front of me. He was a lot younger than me. And he did the thing with his watch. And I went, "Oh, Dick Tracy." And he kind of looked at me askew. It was like,
when I do it with my daughter, she's like, "Dad, stop flexing and bragging about that you got this." Oh, well, look, I work in the industry, honey.
Right. Yeah.
It's so interesting. So let's do this, Vijay. Let's transition a little bit, because I know we also want to talk about the USA ePay, which is kind of the most recent acquisition. So let's talk about that a little bit. So we already alluded to it earlier. USA ePay has built this really big book of card present. Of course, NMI has a huge book of card not present. So talk to us about that a little bit. Talk about Omnichannel. When ISOs and agents are looking at this acquisition, it's funny, I got probably 3 or 4 emails before this podcast saying, "What do you think about the NMI ePay acquisition?" Right? So let's answer that question for our audience. Why did you make this acquisition? And how important is Omnichannel moving forward, do you think, for ISOs and agents that are out there trying to sign merchants?
Sure. So there's a couple of reasons why we came together with USA ePay. One of them has to do with Omnichannel that you alluded to. USA ePay had more of a balanced portfolio of a card present and card not present, whereas NMI was very heavily skewed to e-commerce only. Now, during COVID, what has happened is the notion of omnichannel has, I would say, flipped on its head. We used to, pre-COVID, think of omnichannel. There was a sun in the solar system, if you will, and that was retail spend, card present, and e-commerce was at the edge of the card present, right? The solar system revolved around card present. What happened was we weren't allowed to go to stores anymore because of lockdown. So now everything, the sun, the solar system was an e-commerce sun. And now you would go to the store to do pickup, but you actually paid for it at home. It was called buy online, pick up at store,
right.
Or pick up at the curbside. And so that thing got flipped. And when that thing got flipped, we saw that we needed more expertise to deal with the folks that were going to be at the store when the recovery came back. And that strength of us being, bigger in e-com and them being more balanced was a great way to fortify our omni-channel. They were more advanced in cloud-based connectivity for point-of-sale terminals and support because they had more exposure to that. They had a better what we call swipe app, which is an app to take a transaction on a phone and key enter it. So the first one was omni-channel, fortify our position. The second reason for the acquisition was scale. And you guys have been writing a lot about the mega mergers that have been going on. Well, even at the lower end, we are a very small company. We're about 300 people. USA ePay was about 100. We were about 200. We don't want to become 200,000 person company because that'll make us maybe slower and not as nimble and as agile. But we need to be a little bigger than we are so we can consolidate resources because the game is moving faster. The clock speed of innovation is ticking at a much higher pace than before. So we need more resources to be able to deliver things like omnichannel and tap on phone.
And just to kind of reiterate the second part of that question, when we're talking to ISOs and agents that are out there, they're talking to merchants on a daily basis, how important do you think it is for them to start transitioning their mindset to talk more about omni-channel rather than just, again, whether it's physical location or whatever? I mean, are you seeing that shift with ISOs that you work with that they're, because as it seems so obvious, right? Like I'm saying this in the podcast and it sounds ridiculous. Like obviously it's really important, but they haven't really made the shift in a lot of cases. So are you seeing that a lot from ISOs that they're finally now making the shift and talking about omni-channel?
Yeah, it's such a great point. When we bought Credit Call a few years ago and we came out with our first omnichannel product and we rebranded our entire company as Unified Commerce Enablement, Many of our ISO partners who were e-commerce only said, oh, well, we don't need that. And we said, hey, we now have the ability for you to take transactions with one token store and one integration on Ingenico and Verifone terminals. And well, we don't need that. And I said, well, really? Are you sure? And then somebody would call back and say, you know, so-and-so, one of our merchants is doing a pop-up store in a mall. This is before the lockdowns. Can we get that terminal? Because we actually need to take some card present transactions.
Right.
I love this one. In Ohio, we had a horse vet. And the horse vet said, oh, no, we have everybody prepay before they show up with their horse.
Yeah, right.
And then we told them, we told our partner, we said, well, wait a minute, you can now take it when they show up with the horse with a card if you like. And they came back and they said, you know, now that we told people they can pay, they don't have to rush home, make the payment, or we trust that they'll pay afterwards. Because half the time the horse is sick and they're not thinking about going to a web page and typing in their 60-digit PAN number. So we saw the skepticism, and the reality was the uptake started to happen. Having said that, the omnichannel take up with our ISO base has been much slower than I would have expected until the COVID lockdowns hit. And then people said, we need QR codes. We got to do buy online, pick up at store. And they may have the card on them for an add-on. So it's accelerated.
Right. Let me, if you don't mind, I'd love to circle back just for a moment to the credit call acquisition. My understanding is they were very big. They are very big in the unattended world, you know, parking lots, transit ticketing, you know, those vending. I'm wondering, do you see opportunities for US ISOs and agents, you know, to grow their portfolios in these niche, you know, client verticals?
Yeah, it's a great question, Patti. So unattended, it's kind of a weird nomenclature. I think unattended comes from like the Visa Mastercard rule book. It's like a type of transaction.
Right.
But really what it means is there's no human being at that point of sale.
Right.
And again, so much of our consumer behavior in the last 12 months has changed, where we want to have more experiences where, you know, we're able to interact at the payment, you know, without having to hand our card to a clerk or touch the cash. Right. And so now let's go through why unattended is, I think, for our ISO partners, really important. You've got ticketing, transit, and vending. And parking, ticketing, which is part of transit and vending. Now, we had an ISO that did these LA County Fair type of events. And this is before the lockdown. And they said, man, if we could have a kiosk at the LA County Fair and people could just buy the ticket coming and going, that would be huge for our partner. Can we please have that solution? So that's one example. The other one is in Sweden. You know, Scandinavia is very contactless oriented. We had somebody that created a store in an Amazon Go-like fashion. You come in, you scan a QR code at the turnstile, you pick stuff off the shelves, and there's little sensors like in those Las Vegas mini bars, and you leave the store with all your stuff. That's a vending machine on steroids.
Yeah,
that's something that some of our ISOs that sell to gyms want for Gatorade or an extra towel or, you know, some type of hand cream. So yes, ISO partners should be embracing it. We're trying to do more education. It's a little new for them, but some of them are embracing it in a big way. The last one is charity. Churches, synagogues, and let's say hospitals raising money. We did this in the United Kingdom. We brought it to the US. You put a kiosk and you just tap your phone or your card, $1, $5, $20 donation. We put the kiosk in the church. Donations went up by 25% in the first day, by 200% within a week.
Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. My brother-in-law is a pastor, and, you know, churches saw obviously a huge change with COVID as well, because, you know, people couldn't come to church, but, you know, many of the faithful parishioners still wanted to make donations. And so they were all scrambling, like, we got to be able to take donations online. And, you know, so now I think as people are coming back to church in some states, then it's like, okay, we want that kiosk where they can either make the payment there or they can sign up for auto pay or whatever it might be. So yeah, it's been very interesting it's been interesting to me to kind of see all these trends that we knew were going to happen over the next 5 years anyway, but it's like they all happen over like a month.
Right.
Wow.
Super speed.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I find funny about these things is when we really dissect our lives pre-digitization of commerce, it's kind of the same thing. You used to have the box at the church where you put the dollar bill or the quarters in it.
Right.
All we're doing is just replacing that box with a little mail slot in it, with a contactless reader in it, that has the ability to take a contactless payment. And we added a button. We worked with a European company called Payter, I think they're out of Holland. And there's a little button on it, and it just says, we did in the UK, £1, £5, £20. It's a 24/7 kiosk that's in train stations and town squares for the Children's Hospital. It turns out that this is a funny story. In the UK, we have, a lot of people come out of the pub, maybe 11 p.m. and they had, a couple of beers because it's Friday night. They're in a really gift-giving mood. So we started to see 11 p.m. to midnight, a surge of the highest tier of donations for the Children's Hospital.
On the way home, feeling guilty, let's just tap the phone and
That's great. That's great.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think there's remarkable opportunities here in the US for these types of transactions. And you brought up the gyms. That's one of the first things I go to. The church is an interesting one. I grew up in a Catholic community, and I always remember the baskets coming across, and
Yeah.
right. And I was just thinking, visualizing when you were saying that, because it was always like on a handle. I was visualizing a little device in the basket, and everybody taking out their card and hitting it as it goes down.
Well, it's such a great example because we actually, now you've just given us an idea. We have a company up in Toronto, Canada, that asked us to make a level 2 kernel. That would be this EMV acceptance device in a piece of plastic. I think the company, it has the word tip in it, but it's for valets at the hotel room door when you open the door, not hotel room door, the taxi, or the person that picks up your suitcase. And they have this idea to have a little small device that they just will hand out. And again, it'll just be a $1, $2, $5. You just press a button and then you tap your card. And we have that customer because they want to come up with a specific device. They could actually put that in the basket that you experienced there, Patti.
Yeah, right. That's what I was thinking when you were saying that. That would be a perfect example, and nobody has to touch anything, right?
Right.
Well, Vijay, this has been so enlightening, and I did want to just real quickly ask you, because I know you and I spoke a couple weeks ago when I was doing a piece for the Green Sheet, and I know that you were talking about at that time about NMI's Gateway Partner Program. Could you just briefly give us a little high level explanation about that and why ISOs, MLSs should care about it?
Yeah, so we basically have enablement in our DNA, and every time we always say enable because we are not a company that is monetizing payments. We don't issue merchant accounts. We are in the what I call bring your own mid. If you think of the BYOB, you come to the party with your own booze or beer or whatever that is.
Yeah.
We are the bring your own mid player. And so the gateway partners, one of the great things they can do signing up with us is there's actually no cost to sign up. It's actually a very simple way of doing that. And you just go to our website and we can contact you if you're interested, but it gives you a lot of flexibility because now you can sign up with multiple processors and acquirers, and you can bring your own mid and start to spread your volume across multiple processors. And the beauty of that gateway program is that we give you the entire omnichannel stack that we just described.
Right.
So if you sign up for us, one integration and one console where you can brand it to make it look like yourself, gives you, a myriad of EMV devices. It gives you the tap on phone stuff we just talked about. You get the kiosk for the church. And of course, you get the gateway connectivity.
Right.
The other thing is we are a company that we like to joke internally, we're the most important payments company that you've never heard of by design, because we want to be behind the scenes. So if you want to sign up for our program as an ISO or even an ISV or a value-added reseller, we disappear. Our URLs are things like, network.processing.com. We don't have the word NMI anywhere. We have built it from day one so that it's your business and your logo up front. And we don't have to be known to anyone other than the people that read the Green Sheet.
Great.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love it. And again, I started the podcast off saying this, but we've had a lot of success working with NMI at our company. It's interesting, Vijay, because I remember, I don't know how long ago it was, where I saw Stripe for the first time. And, my background is as a developer and then also as a salesperson. So I kind of had both of these sides. And, I remember the first integration I did with Stripe and I thought, nobody in our industry is ever going to figure this out because it's so easy. But then we actually did some integrations with NMI then a few years after, and I was like, all right, somebody got it, so I love it. Great integrations. A lot of times I talk to salespeople and ISO specifically that have gotten all of their merchants locked in to a gateway that is not processor agnostic, and sometimes that causes some issues. So I think that's great. Can you share with everybody? You just mentioned the website already, I think, but where would you send people if they want to learn more about partnering with NMI?
Sure. Literally just go to nmi.com, and there are our emails, our phone numbers. People can also reach out to me directly on Twitter or on LinkedIn. And I can point you in the right direction. I do just want to point out, we're not the only people that are processor agnostic. I mean, Stripe, of course, as you mentioned, is great for a quick integration. But once you want choice, flexibility, and modularity, you come to people like us. We believe that there's a community here within the Green Sheets, reader base, and we just want to help the community. Whether you come to us or someone else, we'll also help you, tell you what your options are. It may be better for you to go to Stripe if you're just, a guy and a gal with a dog in a garage on a laptop. And so we really believe in, let's make the community more educated. We'd like to be your provider, but if not, we will also point you in the right direction.
Well, that's great stuff. Thank you, Vijay. That was really, really enlightening. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for having us on the podcast. I know we did it 2 years ago. I'd love to come on more often. And thank you for also educating the community through the Green Sheet, through the podcast, through the pages in your online magazine now, I guess I would call it. We really appreciate it. And we love being part of this community. We think this is the most fun industry to be in, and it's growing. And we are very fortunate in a time where many people are losing their job that we are able to help merchants keep the economy going.
Well, I think James and I agree that we all love what we do.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again, Vijay. Thanks for your time. Great stuff.
Great stuff, man. Be well. Well, everybody, we'd like to give a shout out right now to our sponsor, Valor Paytech. James, you and I have seen a few of these demonstrations now.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that really resonates with me is the simplicity of what Valor is offering. I mean, it's a POS terminal and a cash discounting platform, right? I mean, that's pretty unique.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
And
it's card not present as well. So it's kind of it's the gateway. It's everything is kind of rolled in. And to your point, I think a lot of these omni-channel solutions feel like they're kind of pieced together in a haphazard way, which a lot of times they are through acquisition and stuff.
Sure.
Whereas in Valor Paytech's case, everything works smoothly. The whole omni-channel experience, physical terminal, gateway, cash discounting, it all just works.
And it was built from the ground up as an all-encompassing type of gateway terminal platform. And some of the stuff that I thought is really cool that we should emphasize is that it's fully compliant with the cash discounting disclosure requirements, cash discounting on tips, which I think is a real savior to restaurant staffs in this day and age. And it's easy to remove the non-cash adjustments without having to go back and reinitiate the transaction.
Just push a button and waive the fee.
So
I like it. Well, for those of our listeners that have still not gotten your free Valor demo, or maybe you've gotten one, you want to reach out again, go to ccsalespro.com/Valor. That's VALOR, ccsalespro.com/Valor. If you're enjoying the podcast, if you get value from our content, we would love for you to take a look at our sponsor, Valor Paytech, and send us a message. Let us know what you think.
Yeah, let's do it.
And now, here is Questions from the Field with James Shepard.
So, Patti, today I want to talk about the one-call close and when you should use the one-call close and when you should not use the one-call close.
Okay.
So this actually came from an agent I had in our 6-week Jumpstart program. We had our first coaching call yesterday, and she was talking to me about her situation. And so she has an ISO, and they are primarily offering Clover, and they're primarily pushing cash discounting using the Clover Flex and things of this nature. And so she was talking to me and she was asking what kind of approach she should use. So I was walking her through the approach I would use, which was, in this case, it was a 2 to 3 call approach where she would talk about doing a free demo. When they agreed to it, she would either do it right then or schedule to come back later. And she said, well, my manager is really wanting us to do, this one call close where, if we don't make the sale when we're there, we should just forget about it.
Huh.
And so I proceeded to tell her I thought that was a really bad idea.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like the best idea to me.
So let me talk about the one call close for a second and just give you a couple of qualifiers of when should you use the one call close. In other words,
good idea.
When should you try to close the sale on the very first visit? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There are really two primary qualifying factors, and that is simplicity of what you're selling.
Right.
And number two is sales experience. Okay. If you have a lot of sales experience and you're selling something that is pretty simple. So cash discounting could be certainly a good example if you're selling it to a smaller merchant where the pitch is, I'm going to eliminate your processing fees and I'm going to give you a free terminal to do that.
Right. Right.
So in this case, I talked to her and, to her, kudos to her ISO. They are giving that Clover Flex away for free when they do cash discount.
Okay.
So that does make it definitely easier. It's possible to do the one call close there. So I think the simplicity was there, but I told her, I said, your problem is she is new to sales. And so she does not have very much sales experience. And I said, for me to tell you, try to do a one call close all the time, that is going to be really bad advice because frankly, you're not going to pull it off. And you're gonna
get disappointed and leave.
Yes. And I said, I told, and it's funny, like people always, I think, get a kick out of doing coaching with me because I just never sugarcoat anything. I'm just very transparent. And I said, the bottom line is you're not good enough to do it. So
Right. Maybe if you've been selling for 10, 15 years, you'd be good enough.
I'm like, I can tell you what you want to hear, but it's not going to help you. You can't do this. So here's the thing. What I like to do is I like to design my sales approach so that I have very well-defined sales stages or steps along the process.
Okay.
And so I think the misconception people have is that somehow the one call close is this totally different thing. It's not. It actually is not like a one-step sales process. It's just that you figured out how to streamline the steps and you want them to all happen on one visit.
Right. Sure.
So, in her case, I said, okay, well, let's talk about it. I said, I'm not telling you to not do the one call close. I'm just saying you're probably not going to pull it off because if you go in and say, if the first step is make contact and the next step is get them to agree to a demo of your Clover Flex, well, there's nothing stopping you from doing it right now. But the thing is, the amount of sales ability and skill it's going to take to get them to agree to do it right now, you probably don't have. So what's going to naturally occur is they're going to say, well, I'm busy right now. You're not going to know how to overcome that. And then you're going to schedule it for tomorrow or the next day. That's fine. Right. That's okay. Whereas a more skilled salesperson, they would have already thought through all the possible objections and off ramps and exits that could happen. They've closed all those exits. They have a streamlined process and they assume the sale and they're able to get to that next step, Well, then once you do the demo, what comes next? Well, now you need to do a presentation of, specific value so that, you've done you found out what they need. Now you're going to present to them exactly the right solution for them. Well, if you have a lot of experience, you're going to know what that solution is. If you don't, you're going to say, I'll come back tomorrow. You're going to call your manager and say, what do I pitch? Right. So there's all these kind of, stops along the way. So what I would say is, again, the simpler the thing is that you're selling. If you say, I want to sell a full feature, I want to sell, Zuza point of sale system to somebody that needs appointment scheduling. That is not a one call close. I don't care how good you are at sales. If you do get a one call close, they're going to get cold feet and you're going to have a bad relationship there. That's too big of a decision to make in 15 or 20 minutes.
Sure. Yeah.
Several visits there. But if you're selling something really simple, especially as a smaller merchant, traditional processing, maybe a simple tablet POS system or smart terminal, yes, you can pull that off. But again, the way to pull it off is not to try to come up with this special one call close strategy. It is, what are the sales stages in the sales process, and then start to figure out how can I remove barriers that are causing me to delay between those stages and get them all to happen in 20 minutes.
Right.
So it's sales ability and skill. That is the variable that takes a 2 to 3 call close and makes it a 1 call close.
Sure.
Right. So, I would just caution, especially sales managers, be aware if you have somebody that's not very good at sales, the odds of them doing a 1 call close are going to be pretty minimal. And so don't discourage it. Obviously it's great when it happens, but just give them a sales process and say, the goal is to have this all happen on one visit, but we recognize that may not happen initially. It may take 2 or 3 visits and that's okay. and encourage people along those lines, then start to work with them to break down those barriers, close those exit ramps so that they can eventually get to the one call close.
Yeah, that's great stuff, James. Thanks.
This is the Insider's Report with Patti Murphy.
James, I wanted to update everybody today on the latest in Interchange. I know we spoke about this last week and the pending changes, and
Right.
I believe we have an interview lined up pretty soon, with some folks to go do a deep dive on that.
Right.
But I thought it was worth reporting that Senator Dick Durbin, whose name is pretty much synonymous with debit card interchange regulation,
Yes.
and as well as Representative Peter Welch, who's a Democrat from Vermont, recently sent a letter to both Visa and Mastercard, urging them in the strongest terms not to go through with the April 1st increases.
Right.
Now, I just think I wanted to make a note here to everybody, just sort of a mini civics lesson, shall we say, that Durbin is the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, which is a pretty powerful committee, but he's also Senate Majority Whip, which means he's sort of like the traffic cop on the Senate floor. If legislation's coming up to be, he works with the Senate Majority Leader, who's Chuck Schumer, to determine what legislation gets on the floor, and then he goes out and corrals all the votes. Right. So he's a pretty powerful guy in the Senate these days, much more powerful than he was when he wrote the Durbin Amendment.
Yeah, and he's the kind of guy that if he decided that Visa and MasterCard needed to be further regulated, he's
in the position to do that.
Not the person that if you're Visa and MasterCard, you do not want Dick Durbin upset with you.
You don't. And in fact, I didn't realize this until I started researching after I saw the letter, that Durbin was one of the reasons that Visa and MasterCard postponed the 2020 increases.
Yes. Right.
And he had written a letter. I forgot until recently that he had written a letter asking them to postpone, and he was very thankful when they did,
Right.
But now he's saying, he wants them to do it again. And I want to just read a few excerpts from this letter because I think it's really important for people to understand how passionate this guy seems to be. He said your proposed fee increases would disproportionately affect online transactions at a time when more and more transactions are going online and more merchants are being forced to offer online.
Right.
He says, quote, millions of Americans are unemployed, unsure of how they will pay the bills or put food on the table. Yet several of your proposed fee increases would target supermarket and restaurant transactions, as many more of those purchases have moved online. And then he goes on to say, just as increased vaccination efforts start to give our Main Street businesses hope for a summer reopening, your companies propose slamming struggling merchants and by extension consumers with fee increases. Raising your fees would undermine efforts to help the economy recover and further reduce Americans' purchasing power. And then he takes a real, sort of patriotic, even more patriotic position when he says, we urge you to call off these planned fee increases. Our nation is still reeling from the ongoing pandemic, and your fees are more than high enough already. This is not the time to take advantage of your position to squeeze more dollars out of your fellow Americans.
Wow. Yeah.
Right?
Well, and I think it's important for our audience that maybe doesn't understand the context here that, understand that Visa and MasterCard, along with all of these issuing banks, these organizations are global in scope. They're not just in the US. Right. And so when you look around globally to see, is Visa and MasterCard, are they making as much? Are their profit margins as high in other countries as it is in the US? The answer is a resounding no.
No.
Why is that the case, Patti?
Because they're regulated in those other countries.
Regulated, all of them. I mean, right. I really think I don't know if they're all regulated or either
pretty darn close.
Or like in Canada, I don't know if they would call it regulation, but the government actually negotiates directly to negotiate rates for merchants. So Visa and Mastercard have this euphoric relationship here in the United States where there's just no regulation. I mean, you have the Durbin Amendment. So Dick Durbin is the only guy so far that regulated them at all.
And he's probably about one of the only guys on the Hill who actually understands how this works.
And he's already gotten regulations through that significantly cut profit for the issuing banks. Now, not for Visa and Mastercard, really, but for the issuing banks. And so this is an individual who, again, understands that context and realizes that most developed countries have already regulated interchange down, and I'm talking about down massively.
Like, what is it? Like 1 point?
Oh, it's crazy. I mean, in
3, I think, in Europe.
Yeah, in Europe, you have you have 20 basis points and 30 basis points. Those are the two interchange fees in the EU. So, or the UK, I'm sorry. So, so anyway, long story short, this is definitely a guy who, when he sends you a letter like that,
you better watch. You better notice.
You think they're going to delay it though? I really don't think they will.
I don't think they will, but I actually have calls into both Visa and MasterCard. They still haven't returned my calls, but I'm not sure if they will.
They're still thinking about it right now.
I think they're probably still thinking about it because, as you suggested, you don't want to get on Dick Durbin's bad side. As the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, he could put through some significant legislation that would curb interchange. Now, admittedly, Visa and MasterCard have lots of lobbyists, in Washington.
They're very powerful as well. But and I think it should also be noted that, so why would they do these changes? Because on the flip side of this, you have their shareholders that have already significantly increased their stock price.
Oh, yes.
Because they knew that these changes were coming in April. And so they've already put that into the price. If they come out and say, we decided to delay another year, another 6 months, their stock price is going to drop like a rock.
Right, but their stock prices over the past year have risen pretty substantially.
Right. I don't think they're going to lose ground over 12 months ago, but they're not in business to not lose ground.
Well, exactly. And, in fairness, I must admit, I actually have a few shares of Visa myself in my portfolio. So, I understand.
You're okay either way. If they delay it, you're happy for merchants. If they go through with it, you're happy as a shareholder.
Exactly.
Great.
So anyway, but it's just really important to be aware of this because, these are the types of bills, and I spent a lot of years in Washington. These are the types of bills that can get slid into, a massive, what we used to call Christmas tree bill. Yes. And you don't notice it.
Something on the tree.
Yep. Everybody's putting something on there.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's very interesting. I'm sure you'll keep us posted on any developments there. So I guess, it's coming up pretty quick. I mean, I guess we're going to know if they're going to implement it here in a week or two. So
I think by the time this broadcast goes out, it'll be probably a week or less. So, yeah.
Absolutely. This episode of the Merchant Sales Podcast was brought to you by Valor Paytech, the technology company that is revolutionizing cash discounting and surcharging with innovative features like dual mid support, waive the fee options, and even adding non-cash adjustment charges to tips. Now, all of this is made possible by a variety of technology devices and solutions such as gateways, tabletop point of sale devices, and features like SMS text messaging and e-invoicing, all with cash discounting in mind. Valor Paytech, bold ideas, smart execution. Make sure you head over to ccsalespro.com/Valor, VALOR, ccsalespro.com/Valor, VALOR. Schedule your free demo today and watch videos and learn more about this amazing technology solution.
Thank you for listening to the Merchant Sales Podcast. Whether you are an industry veteran, processing executive, or just trying to learn about the payment space, we appreciate your time. The Merchant Sales Podcast is a joint production of greensheet.com and ccsalespro.com, and we hope you will tune in next week for more information and tips on building your merchant services business.